Hello, Blazor fans. Welcome to another episode of the Blazor Power Hour. I was just in St. Louis for DevUp. It's a great conference. It was a lot of fun. And I did a Blazor workshop there. I went to the old school Blazing Pizza workshop. I've been dabbling with that again. I wrote some workshop content for Manning as well. It has some things that aren't in the official Blazing Pizza workshop, so there's some great content out there on Manning. But the Blazing Pizza workshop is a community project, and that's something that's free and available to everybody. So I like to go back and touch that every now and then, make sure it's up to date. We're going to play around with that in a little bit. Part of what I'm going to talk about this afternoon with the Blazing Pizza stuff, I've got a workshop that I am working on. It's currently on a wait list. I haven't finished it yet. I've got a lot left to do, but I just keep finding stuff to write about. I might have to just stop at some point and launch this thing. I call it the definitive course on handling null in C# applications. I may have boiled the ocean here, but there are 29 lessons. I would assume there's at least going to be 30 by the time it launches. Talking about different scenarios that you see when you're writing C# apps where you're going to run into null and how to handle nullability. And that segues nicely into our topic for today. We're going to take another look at the Blazing Pizza app and see if we can upgrade this to use the nullable context. I started on this a couple weeks ago on the show, and I got in over my head. I got a little too opinionated, for one. Not scared to admit that. And I got down a couple rabbit holes. So I found a good place to start when I was off air, fixed a lot of the problems I was having on the last show, learned a lot, and we're going to go through some of those changes, and we'll talk about some of the things I found while we upgrade this project. If you haven't seen the Blazing Pizza workshop before, it is a nice example application using Blazor. It's a full stack ASP.NET core application. And it's broken down into several save points. So it's, again, one of those self-guided type workshops. So if you look at this section here, you'll see it has all of these different sessions. And these sessions are essentially all solution files where you can jump in and start learning by starting at a specific session. So maybe you know the beginning parts of Blazor and you want to get right into maybe doing some authentication. You could just jump into session 6, open up the solution, and start coding starting at that step. So that makes it a little bit difficult to migrate the entire workshop. I started with the finished product last time, and while it's a decent place to start, it's a little bit overwhelming, and especially if I'm going to start pushing commits to the main documentation and stuff, which I'd like to do because the documentation follows each of those solution files. So today I'm going to try to turn this on its head from last time I tried this and go into the save points. And in each one of these save points, again, there is a solution file for each of these. So we're going to start with the getting started solution file, which has 1, 2, 3, 4 projects in it. We have the web client. This is the Blazor application. We have a component library, which I don't think is used until much later in the workshop. We have a server application that hosts the web endpoints, the web API endpoints. And we have a shared logic folder. Mostly it's DTO stuff in here, data transfer objects are in there. That's probably where we're going to start when we tackle this thing. We're going to do this first, this second, and then there's not really on step 0, there's not really any Blazor code in here yet. So what we'll do is carry these changes over to the next solution and start applying the client and maybe the component library stuff. So we'll probably do 1, 2, 3, carry this guy over to the next one, and then continue on from there. And then I can go back at the end of each of these and try to update the work instructions that go along with it. So they include not only the corrected code, but why we're doing what we're doing. So the Blazing Pizza workshop started with Blazor on ASP.NET Core 3.0, and actually 3.1. I know it doesn't sound like much. Difference between 0.0 and 0.1 is actually a pretty big deal. So the history of that was Blazor Server came out in ASP.NET 3.0, and WebAssembly came out in 3.1. So this is a WebAssembly workshop. So it really couldn't have got off the ground too far without that 3.1. So it might have been something that was being worked on, but not it was probably on a preview version or something if it was that old. You can see some of the stuff dates back 3 and 4 years ago. So it's been around for quite some time, which means it didn't have the nullability feature enabled. Nullable context was not on when they built it. So we're going to go ahead and add that now. I've got my Blazing Pizza workshop sitting at 0 here. This is the 0, 0 step. If we drop back into the folder view here, you can see those steps. So I've got all of the different, like I said, there's a solution for each one of these guys. And then there's the completed. So this one without step numbers is the completed solution. Again, I tried that one last time. I hit a bunch of roadblocks. I managed to get through it off the air, but I did run into things. We'll talk about them when we run into them again. So back to 0, 0. I'm going to start with the shared folder here. Now I could go straight into this thing, and I could just enable the nullable context here by saying enable, like that. And that is going to light up a ton of warnings on this project. So if I go in and save this and watch my error list here, might be nice to pin this guy somewhere where it's going to be on screen most of the time, but not taking up too much of the UI. Maybe we'll drop this over here just for today, just so we can watch our errors a little bit more closely. I'm going to turn the actual error button off here and just watch for warnings. And then we want to build this, and we should get a bunch of warnings coming up. And there they are. So there are 23 warnings in our warnings error list here. Another way we could do this might be a little bit easier. Hey, Thindle, welcome. Welcome to the show. Thindle's got a stream out there too. If you want to follow him on Twitch, make sure you check out his stream. So I could enable it here. We've got 23 warnings that just immediately pop up. I'm going to go ahead and disable this for now, and we'll do it another way. And I'll make it a little bit easier just to see what's happening inside of this error list. And while I do that, I'm also going to go back here, and I'm going to ignore these guys. This is the database. We probably need to drop a git ignore in the solution as well, so we don't keep getting these. Smab UK, welcome. By the way, comments on my audio and video would be handy. I changed my setup recently, so tweaked my microphone settings from last time we did a show. Got some new lights in here. Hopefully things are looking and sounding a lot better. Let me know in the chat. This solution could use a git ignore file for these really badly. And then I'm terrible at that, so I might leave that out till the end and just let them sit there. I got to remember not to commit these, though. And then we also need a branch. So I'm going to create a new local branch here called nullable. I'll just call it nullable for now. I really want to add the work instructions in there, but we'll figure this out as we go. This is good enough. And I'm going to bring the changes with me. It was only those. If I recompile one more time, I moved the nullability back to null, or to disable. We'll rebuild the solution again, and it'll zero out all of those warnings for me. And then I'll go back over into shared. And I learned so much after I tried this last time. We're going to go straight into address as CS here. We'll just start top down. And we'll enable the nullable context from the top of the file instead. So we'll just put that nullable directive in there. And now, when I save this, I got 6 warnings. That was a little bit faster, too. It seemed to not have to like compile the whole project to get those warnings up. It's a little bit faster workflow, too, maybe. This is going to be a really easy one. I know this application well enough that I know where this address class is being used. And it's really just there for form models to capture the address fields in a form and then populate that into a database later. So these are really easy to make safe as far as nulls are concerned by just presetting all of these properties. So if I hover over this, you will see an error come up. That are warnings, sorry, they're warnings. I keep calling them errors. They are warnings. It says non-nullable property for all of these. Line 1, postal code, city, name, must contain a non-null value when exiting the constructor. Consider declaring the property as nullable. These are just strings. Strings can't always just be set to an empty string, as we'll see in some of these, but for the purpose of this address class, I know that this is the best course of action. It's to just go ahead and set these to an empty string. So this is going to ensure that they never come up null. And this also will be okay when we start adding the validation logic too. So an empty string on the validators is going to trigger a required validation still. So the required field validator in the front end of the application isn't going to see the empty string and think there's something there. So it's not like adding a bunch of white space characters or anything like that. This is safe to do. So that's the easiest one of the bunch. And you'll see all of our warnings are gone. Let's see, latitude, longitude. Smab says, I prefer the double quotes, but it's only a visual preference. They do the same thing. I think they're same to the compiler too. String.empty is just a little bit more verbose. Some folks might glance over the double quotes, not see them or something, but again, it's all personal preference. Whatever your team does, do that. This one, I don't think there's anything to actually update. I think we'll be fine when we try this one. So let's do nullable, enable. I don't see anything on here. So these are numeric types. So they're doubles, and all value types are not nullable by default. So there's nothing to hit here. So these are actually being set to 0 or R0 by default all the time. So nothing comes up there. So nullable can be enabled there with no problem. This one, I think, is going to be another example, nullable, enable, where a lot of it is strings. But there's one in particular here that we probably need to see how it's used in the application before we can decide too much. And I'm going to just pull up something on my other screen to try to refresh my memory a little bit. So when you're migrating a project with this nullable context, you really have to understand how the code is being used. This could be super complex on an older app that has a lot of moving pieces, and maybe you didn't write even a fraction of the code for it. So you're going to have to just dive in and do massive research on how these classes are actually being consumed, what methods populate them, and stuff like that. So let's see. So this one, the notification subscriptions. This is a class that is populated by one of two things, okay? So the notification subscription in the workshop, you use it with JavaScript interop, and the JavaScript interop will populate all of these fields through a, I want to say a service worker, but it's a JavaScript call that you make. And the JavaScript call is responsible for populating these fields through a JavaScript interop. That then gets saved into a database, and then the database recalls that information and repopulates these fields. So we could set these to an empty string, but I think there's a better option here, and that is to set them to required. And this ensures that any calling code that tries to construct this object is required to set these values before the construction is complete. So you still get a empty constructor with this, but you have to write an object initializer that sets the fields. So that's going to be my choice for the notification subscription. Notice how different that is from the address. It all has to do with how this class is being used in the application. So I'm reading comments. It's hard to talk and read at the same time. Smab, just reading through your stuff here. I would put that it needs to be on the int as well if it needs to be set. So ints default to 0. I don't know if you can set required. Can you set required on a non-nullable field? Indeed you can. So we can set it as required. I guess that, I mean, it's never going to be null, but at least you're telling the consumer that you want them to set that to something, even if it is 0 when it's set. They could use default or whatever. So we'll go ahead and add that too. It's a good idea. On to order CS. Let's take a look at order CS here. This is a tricky one, I think. Now, I have the benefit of foresight where I've done this before. So I went through these with a fine-tooth comb. It's just way too much to do on one show. It took me hours to go through these things. And one of the things that I really had to do is go to the finished project, and then you see right here where we have these references, which I'm not sure if this exists on the Community Edition or not. Somebody using Community Edition, let me know if these little reference markers are in it. I know there's some features in the enterprise version of Visual Studio that aren't available everywhere, but you're going to look into where these things are being used. And order here is one of the most complex ones. It's being used in a lot of places. So if we look at the references for this, we can see some of the uses for where this shows up. And there's a generated file that they're showing up in. So there's something that's being used by the compiler and generating things. And then there's orders controller. Now, orders controller, if you look at it, that's populating the order class from a database. So we're starting to talk about entities now, and entities get really tricky. So what's happening here is this gets commented later in the exercise, but we have these includes. So there are there's a hierarchy here of children that are getting pulled into this order object. So that makes things extra tricky. So we got to be careful of those as well. So there's the user ID. And what happens with the user ID here is it exists in the object even when we make a post and it's not set. So what happens is when we post this to the server, that user ID is null. Then the server does a call to the HTTP context, checks to see if the user is authenticated. If they are, it comes back and fills this in, and then it comes back on the response of that post. So because this is being used while it is null and it's set by the server during post, it really needs to be highlighted that and erased it. Really needs to be a nullable string, okay? Because we're actually posting this null value up to the server. It's expecting it as part of the request payload. And I think this is where I got stuck last time when we were doing this, because the server was expecting a non-null value. I hadn't enabled nullability on the server application yet, and I enabled it on the client application and set this to nullable, and then it conflicted with the model bindings that are happening from the request. So when you request that API, it would not understand that this is the model that we were trying to bind to, and it would just miss the endpoint altogether because it didn't match up, and it would throw an error. So this is where I got stuck major last time. It just got really hung up. So we'll go ahead and set that one. We won't be able to run the application now till we fix the server side of it. Looking back at your message here, Smab, I think we're going to talk about required again. And there's something important about required in this file especially. And I've been on the fence with this one and backed into a corner by the compiler itself. So we'll talk about that too. So inside of the orders file here, you'll see we've got these JSON serialization attributes applied. And this is telling the application to create a JSON mapping for this type, and to do it using source generators. So this improves, I guess, the speed of the JSON serialization by providing like a concrete class that is created at build time rather than doing work at runtime to do the serialization. However, the required the required keyword breaks it. So that's something I've been talking to the dev team about over on the ASP.NET GitHub repo. There was a warning issued to not use the required keyword in Blazor because they have some tentative plans to make source generators for property or parameter getters and setters, and it apparently source generators break when you use the required keyword. So there are sections of this where you have to use either nullable or set it to default bang, which is the null forgiving operator, instead of using the required keyword. Let's see, what else we have here? Address gets set to new address, and pizzas get set to a list of new pizzas. So we don't have to worry about those, but we see this nullability warning here that we're not fulfilling this until, or when we exit the constructor is null. This is another one that it is null during the post. During post, it gets set and returned back. So this one we can expect it to be set by the server, but not, it's going to be null when we pass it to the server. So that one needs to be null because we need to pass the null object up to the server so it can be populated and sent back. It's just the way the API works. I didn't write it. Don't shoot the messenger there. You could have separate response, request and response objects to do this without having to have a null field here. So basically you would have two objects that are very similar. The request would have only what the server needs to generate an order, and then the order that gets returned would have all of the fields that you sent it plus the new fields that it populated. But that's not how it was written, so we'll go ahead and just make those nullable. Again, I'm not going to try to correct any best practices or anything on this one. That's where I got into trouble last time. And I believe that is all for that file. So while I said it was very tricky, it doesn't seem like it. We only fixed two things, but I had to do a lot of digging to figure out where these two things were being used. This one has 13 references in the application here. And some of these are generated, so we can't count those, but there's at least 6 here where they were being used. And what I noticed was they're always being newed up by the server before they're processed. Basically, the delivery location is a fake anyway. Maybe on a real application, this wouldn't be so straightforward, but the server generates the location through like a random number generator. And you would get that like out of location services or something on the client. There'd probably have to be some try-catch handling around it, that sort of thing. But for this, it's a little bit easier. All right, so next we need to go to order with status. Drop that one down and bring in nullable here. And this one's got a lot going on. And I think there's some code changes in this one too. We'll have to go in and tackle. So this is another one where it's actually called out by order. So if we click over back into order, we were just in that file, and it has this source generator attribute added to it. This is the one, if we make it required, it will actually explode. Let's see if we can actually trigger that. So I'm going to add required here so you can see this in action. And then I'm going to go back and say build. Now, these are warnings, so it should still build, but we will get a failure. And it's, let's see, required member with order must be set during construction. And this is the proper warning message that you would get if you were trying to new up an order context and didn't fulfill all of the object initializers. So if we look at what the source generator created, and it says right here that this is an auto-generated file, it can't be edited. It is order with status.g.cs, which also tells you that it is a generated class. You see object creator, and then it says new order with status, and then it doesn't fill in the objects that need to be initialized. So that throws a null reference exception. So you should see in here, I don't even know if it'll let me type in, well, a set of open curly braces with all of the properties being set that are required. It's not doing that, so it throws an error. So the source generator does not make use of this required operator here, and instead you have to set this field to null and forgive it. It's never really going to be null because it gets set by the by entity framework. And throughout the application, we're never in order with status setting this to null for any reason. So I really had to dig through the code in the app to make sure that we're not using null here. Otherwise, we get more errors. There's only 4 references here now, but I believe when you move through the project a little bit more and start writing UI code, you will see that there's more uses for that code. But again, never set to null. The way I approach is to ask the question, does the field have a valid state where it is unknown? If yes, then it is probably null. Yeah, that's what we're going to look at next. And you said you normally tackle the server side at the server-side data models and then moving outwards. Yeah, we're kind of, this project's not as big. I could have probably started in the server and then kind of picked at these along the way. Since it's not as big, I'm just going through the shared here first. Status text. Trying to remember how this one plays out. So we've got status text. That one also gets set from the entity framework bits. So if we look at where this is set, it actually gets set when the order is being populated. So if we go back to order with status up here, this one is set from the order itself, from values from the order itself, through this from order extension method that gets run when the order with status is constructed. So that one also ensures that there is code initializing that field, and we can set it to null and mark it as ignore. This one already has a default value and it's a read-only property. Then we've got markers. This one, again, same thing. This one gets set from the service that runs the location bits. So like the JavaScript interop and stuff sets the map markers, and that's all code that is written to make sure this list of markers is not null. I think that also either sets up like, oh, here it is right here beneath me. So it's set in this from orders routine here, and it always adds a new list of markers. We could probably also set that to an empty list of markers and it would be fine. But it is initialized right here below it, so it's really not worth constructing that empty object for nothing. It's just going to immediately get written to from the from orders method. But we do end up with a little bit of an issue with the logic here. And this is saying that there is a possibility of null here. Possible null reference argument for the chords. So coordinates in marker. So this isn't even in the file that we're touching, but this is kind of leaked into the latitude, longitude bits. So there is a deeply nested hierarchy here that's triggering this nullability warning. I'm trying to remember where that is. Let's try to find it. So we've got lat long. It's not in there. Is it in marker? Is it in the marker? No. There's a property called chords. I'm trying to remember where coordinates is. It's not in lat long. It's not in address. Delivery location. Keeps coming up there. I'm trying to remember where this code actually sits. Chords in marker, it says. I was just in marker. I didn't see it. Is there a partial or something for that? Let's do the good old search and find in code. Code search. It's not finding it. The compiler can see it, so I know it's in here somewhere. We're still getting that error. That I think just needs to be rebuilt and it'll go away. Chords. Marker. So you can see it, right? Oops. There. My zoom tool popped off on me. So you can see it says, oh, the parameter chords in marker, map to marker. So it's actually in a method called map to marker, this method here. There we go. So this extension method, it was all the way down at the bottom. Latitude, longitude is called chords here. And in this extension method, we have a nullable. Chords is not a word. Yeah, no kidding. Let's see. So this extension method gets passed in this lat, and then there are chords, and then chords gets applied here. I think what we can do is just check this. And what we'll do is, it should never actually happen, but we'll just kind of satisfy the compiler here. And we'll just say if, and then we can say delivery location. We'll just protect this entire block of code from this. Oops, I wrote that wrong. If order dot delivery location is null, throw a new null argument exception. I don't believe we'll ever hit that, but it will clear up those warning messages for that method. There's also a new extension method too, I think we could use. So it's null throw if null, and then you can do that. Let's see, does it takes an argument? So it's order, I don't know if it'll work on that one. Order delivery location. Does it work like that? There we go. That works too. So you can one line that in there too. So yeah, that's a new one you may or may not have seen. Oh, Smab's already on top of it. I don't have my, I have two things going in front of my chat window, so I don't always see chat in real time. but you were on top of it. So we can just throw a null argument exception there for that delivery location bit. And then this is literally the same thing here. We'll just go ahead and protect that code as well. And you can see all the errors clear up on this side. And that warning is from something that we got rid of already. So we can just clear that out. So that's that one. Pizza's next. Let's see what we can do with this one. So we're using different techniques to kind of put out all these fires along the way. And so far we've used like null argument exceptions. We've used the null forgiving operator. We've used just setting some defaults. We've set a couple things to nullable here and there. Not too many, though, which is good. We don't want a bunch of null stuff being passed around. There's so many patterns out there that can help us deal with that, but they're not used in this code base at all. And again, I don't want to put too much opinionated stuff in here yet. We might do that later. But I actually want to submit these as pull requests eventually and have them pulled into the main project, because I know they're going to be updating this for .NET 8. And this is something that needs to be done before .NET 8, in my opinion. Pizza specials. This one is used throughout the UI. We set it to null to blank out forms and things like that. Again, there's patterns for this, but they're not implemented here. So we're going to take the bare minimum approach and just say that it's going to be null somewhere in the application at some point. So guard against it. The toppings, in this context, I think there's a couple other places where there is a parameter of a list of toppings in other objects. This is not like a global thing. So you might see it being used as null in other places, but this particular list of toppings, we can just use new here, I think, right? There we go. We can just set that one to an empty list, and that one will be fine. But it does mess around with the base price when we do this. So there's a calculation here to get the base price. And the reason this one is throwing on us is this right here, where we may dereference a base price property. Yeah, that's right on, Smab. If I didn't if I didn't know this application inside and out by now, I wouldn't be able to make these decisions, and that's where things get really hard. So upgrading a big project, like I said, if you don't know all the moving pieces, this can wreak havoc. It's like the old async await problem when everything wasn't awaitable, and you just add like one async await in there, and like everything would just go nuts. We can't do this because it's part of a calculation. And what this operator here, this null conditional operator, is trying to do is it's saying like, if this is null, then this will return null, which would then get calculated into size. But null is not a floating point decimal, so it's throwing this whole error up here. So we can't use that. What we can do is just guard the whole thing. Again, I don't see this actually ever happening, but this will make the compiler happy. And we can say if special is null, then return 0. So that is one way to do it. So since it's a decimal, I think we could also say default here, but really what we're doing is returning 0 anyway. We can do this a little bit more explicit, I guess, and just say 0. And that works. That makes it happy. So if this is null, then we can't really calculate this anyway, so it's really just going to be 0. Shouldn't that be an exception? Yeah. That might be better as an exception, because 0 would be an incorrect price. That's a good idea. So we could do, since it's not being passed as a parameter, we would have to do, well, it's still going to be the same logic here, except that we would do, let's see, we could do it this way. Should we put the if statement on there? What type of exception would you make that? Just a custom exception? The custom message? We don't have something that's really, let's see, invalid operation. I don't know if that really. Exception is thrown when a method call is invalid for the object's current state. Just do a null reference exception. What I do like about this, like the whole idea of like guarding against null and all this stuff, is so you don't get null reference exceptions. The difference here is we're expecting a null reference exception. So we know like where this is actually being triggered. It's not, I mean, it's still unhandled, but at least we can see it in the code where this is going to happen. It's giving us some context. Where is my null reference exception? Null, there it is. Null reference exception. And then we can actually put a meaningful message in here. We can say that we need to put that guy in there. And then we can say name of use the same shortcut as before. So one was an argument. This isn't an actual argument. So base price isn't taking any arguments. Base price is mutating state, to be honest. Well, not mutating state. It's returning a value based on the state. It's not actually changing any of the state. So it's calculating it based on the current state of the object. So it doesn't take parameters to throw a null parameter exception. Is there, can I do null reference exception? Come on, autocomplete. Give me that. There's no extension method on that one. Let's see. So we could do that. So we could say that it was null when calculating the base price. And then we have another, I thought we had another one. That gets summed. That's not throwing a warning. That was the only warning I got in here. So I appreciate the input there, Smab. It's good thinking. It is a scenario where we don't want to like cover up the error, right? We don't want to like hide the error, and then we're troubleshooting for days trying to figure out why some random pizza keeps coming up with no price. And then like, didn't we have this happen? Well, depends on where you live. This happened to McDonald's. McDonald's had the kiosks where you can build your own order. And yeah, It did exactly that. This is a real thing that happened, by the way. Like, so McDonald's had these kiosks, and somebody found out if you added like a bunch of lettuce, let's say, I can't remember the exact condiment. There was a condiment of some kind. I think it was like lettuce, bacon, some ridiculous thing. If you went in and like added a bunch of lettuce and then like took off like some other condiment, it would make a negative like 5 cents or something like that. So then they would go and just keep adding and removing these condiments until the burger was like free. And then they would process their order. And since it was all being done at a kiosk, like nobody saw it. Like the person would make the order and bring it out. And it took McDonald's a while to figure out what the heck was going on. They probably were running their like point of sale system reports at the end of the day. And they're like, why did we sell all of these Big Macs for free today? Like, what is going on? And then they saw what condiments were all over it. And also probably just checking social media for 5 seconds realized that they had an issue. I think you're right there, Mr. Magoo. I don't believe this is a thing that can actually ever happen, but the compiler believes it's a problem. I don't think you would get this far before you would either run into an error somewhere else or there's some malicious activity, something like that, to actually make this happen, because the pizza special being null is part of UI operations. And then like you still have to like submit the pizza order, and it has to do some checking on the server side to make sure it's a valid pizza order. So I don't think this can actually happen. This is all just for UI. And I don't think the price is coming. Like, you never want to trust the price that you set in the UI of the application being submitted to the server as the actual price, which I don't know what McDonald's was doing. Like, I mean, it's not the exact same scenario. It's not a null thing. It's they found a calculating loophole that apparently was happening on their probably an old mainframe at the end of the day. Why is pizza nullable? It should be a default pizza if null is not allowed. Again, you may have just showed up, Mr. Magoo, but I'm only patching the existing code to the Blazing Pizza application. I'm not rewriting any of their practices in it. So there are techniques like the null object pattern that you could use, which would have like a default pizza instead of a null. But I'm not going to rewrite the entire application right now to make that type of thing happen. It's going to take too much time, and I believe like there needs to be a trail of pull requests before something opinionated is added and that pull request gets rejected. So like the ASP.NET team isn't going to reject me adding nullability to the project, but they will likely reject something that's opinionated like a code pattern. So if I do this, get the pull request accepted, then go back and add like the null object pattern to it, or some other method, some other opinionated method, because there are others. Functional programming has like some, none, either. Those type of things could be used too. But yeah, like they will probably most likely reject those opinionated things. And I don't want to waste a bunch of time fixing all of these problems, adding the opinionated stuff, submitting one pull request, and then having to go like undo pieces of it to get them to finally accept. So we're doing the bare minimum right now. And in the current work instructions, the pizza special is set to null when the order is completed to reset a form. So it's null is being used in the code. We're going to go ahead and say it's nullable. So that is all for that one. I have a hard out here. Let me see when that is. I have a hard out. I need to find my schedule. I'm going to unshare my screen for 1 second while I try to find my schedule for the day and see when I need to shut the stream down. So bear with me for 1 moment. Let's see. I've got Teams turned off. So it's been a good exercise, at least, Mr. Magoo, like doing all of these things, and then like we'll add the opinionated stuff. We can do even more exercises on top of that. But I've been doing this to write a workshop on the subject, and it's actually been pretty difficult to get the workshop just right. So, I've got plenty more time. I got plenty more time. We can keep on going. I've got another hour here. So let's go back to the screen share, get my big old mug off the screen. And let's see, StreamYard, where'd you go? There we go. Now you can see the screen again. So I don't know if I shared the URL for it earlier, but I can share it. And let's see. Let me find my workshop thing. And again, it's in pre-release mode right now. That's not the right one. This is the page I can share. It's in pre-release, so that means you'll just get an email when it comes out. Right now it is, you can see like the outline of the course, and it's probably about 60% completed. So I've got a lot of like video to create and samples to finish before that's done. But this has been part of the discovery of what needs to go in that workshop. Sounds like some of you probably know quite a bit of this already based on some of the responses I'm getting. But I'm trying to add some of those opinionated things too that we were talking about. I want to have some of that in there. I haven't got to that part of it even. There's some really interesting stuff I've been finding throughout all this. All right, so we've got a pizza special next. Pizza special. And if my camera just shook, I forgot to turn my alarm off on my phone. So whenever I get a message, it's going to shake my camera because I'm using my phone camera. So that's fun. Let's see. We've got pizza special next. This one is another one that's fairly easy here. We'll just go ahead and set some default fields. We'll do an empty string on that. The description is also okay if it's empty. I mean, worst thing is the pizza wouldn't have any description, right? This one can cause a little bit of problem. This one we can actually set to like an actual value. So if there's no image, which I didn't, these are all in a database, but if for some reason this image URL didn't get set, like the worst case scenario is to go ahead and just set it to the cheese pizza. That is our, like Mr. Magoo was kind of saying, like this is like our default pizza. So this is going to be the default image for that. So that one was easy. That one's done. This one, let's see, topping is in there. Topping may need to be set. Go ahead and set the nullable context here. We've got topping. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, this one's pizza topping. My bad. I thought it was different than the other code I was looking at. Topping is one that the UI uses as a null. So null is referenced somewhere in here we go. It's actually used on the server. My bad. Because it's a related value. So it says right here, enforce the existence of a pizza special, blah, 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 in the database to prevent the submitter from making up new specials and toppings. So what happens with this piece of code is the null is being used here to provide additional safety with Entity Framework. So if somebody were to send a phony post to the server where they went in and fiddled with, which I say fiddled because shameless plug, Telerik Fiddler could do this for you. Great tool for inspecting HTTP traffic and working with your web APIs, submitting requests, looking for security loopholes like this one. I could go into Telerik Fiddler and I could create a post that fulfills all of the entity information for a custom pizza order that's like negative $100, something like that. Add toppings that don't exist, fool the system into doing something it's not supposed to do because of these related fields. So it has the pizza special and the pizza toppings. And if we were to submit these with values, it's possible that Entity Framework could pick those up and create entries in the database that, if it didn't have an ID and it had, a pizza special of negative $100, that goes into the database, that could cause issues. So the person that wrote this place order action here, what they're doing is they get the ID, they null out the related info, and then let the ID be the what do you call that? There's a proper name for this. The oh, come on. I'm trying to use the right terminology here and it's escaping me. The single source of truth. Is that what I'm, yeah, the ID is the single source of truth. So the ID gets saved, and then when you recall the information by ID, you get back the original pizza special that's in the database and all of the related information from it, rather than getting some spoofed info back that somebody published up to the server in a malicious post. Does that make sense? Did I at least make that intelligible a little bit? So that one is null in the APIs for that reason. So it can be set in a little bit of protection against an overposting. All I heard was pizza. How many people are going to go get pizza for dinner after this now? I've said pizza a million times. And we'll talk about toppings next, right? I love it. Let's see. I think that was like one of the comments, if not one of the issues in the GitHub repo, was like, the only thing this pizza app does poorly is it doesn't deliver pizza like it says. I think this one is a empty string because it's a simple class object where an empty string in the name isn't going to hurt anything. For a topping, it just won't show any text. And probably isn't going to happen. It gets populated out of the database anyway. Is authenticated in name here. This one I'm on the fence about. I'm going to say that the name can be empty when it gets initialized. This user info comes from the the bearer token and the authentication. It's the authentication context, but there's another name that's escaping me right now. The authentication security has so many nuanced naming conventions. I want to say cookies, and I know that's not the right thing. Maybe I'm thinking food. Pizza, cookies. If we look at the controller here, I'll find the name of it. The context, nope, that's not it. We actually grab it in here. Get user ID, find, claim. I kept thinking cookie. It started with a C. I was getting there, right? Having a little bit of old man moment. Just the claim provider will return the user ID. It should never be null, except when it's being newed up and we're going to get that ID. So it gets set by that method, and the method should throw an exception if it doesn't get the ID. This is this is Thindle's ASMR, like today's Blazor ASMR videos brought to you by Telerik. If you need UI components and your name is Thindle and you're playing Starfield, this is your jam. All right. Back to this here. We've got one last possibility of null reference. I don't know if that is legit. So I'm going to try to rebuild here. And it says it's in pizza. Let's go ahead and double click and see what comes up. Oh, there is another calculation one. So we ran into this earlier. For some reason, because I just nulled topping. That's what it was. So again, we can't use the null reference or null conditional operator there. So we got to use this type of thing again. And we'll say if it's not special, it is in toppings. This is part of like where state is kind of messy. So we've got a topping. Which one is it? T.topping. So toppings, pizza.toppings. It's with an S. Don't know how that. Oh, it's price that could be null, right? No, price is topping may be null here. That's odd. How could topping be null here? So pizza.toppings. It says right here that it is not null here. Then when we say sum and we pass in, pizza topping, and then topping is null there. Okay, that's where that null is coming from. That's why I said the word toppings is thrown around here so many times it gets confusing. So topping could be null, and we can't do that because, again, part of the sum calculation. I don't foresee this actually happening, but we will go ahead and throw null exception here. If for some reason this were to hit, and it would be topping, no, it is going to be in pizza. It's under special, isn't it? Special dot. If toppings It's going to be in the toppings array, right? Where this is null. So what am I looking at here? Pizza. Ah, yeah. Okay. So it would be, there are nullables in here. Say any. Can we do, oh, I need to put the, whoa, I hit insert. Hang on. No, I didn't hit insert. Why am I overwriting if it's not in insert mode? Did I highlight it? T is null. If any T is null. T.topping is null. Then throw a null reference exception. Since it's in a link operation, this is a real pain in the butt. Sorry, let me get chat back up here. Yeah, if topping is null, but it's inside of a link op, and when I say that, I mean this any. The compiler doesn't see the any as a null check, so it never, it never qualifies this as not being null. So then we need to use the bang operator because we verified here that it is not null, and we're throwing an exception that toppings contained a null when calculating the total price. So we'll throw a null reference exception with some context to it. If somehow a null got in there while we calculated the price. Again, the bang operator resolves that the compiler doesn't see this any as a valid null check. The only other way to get around that would be to sum this in a for each, and it would be a pain. You could also ignore these. Again, who suggested this earlier? Was it Thindle that we throw the null reference exception, or was it Smab? The other option here is to add to the sum calculation the same type of logic. We could say where T dot topping is not null, and just if there is a null in there somewhere, just chuck it. And then just sum what's left. But we still need the bang operator in that. So we could do either. Again, I don't see this ever happening. So we'll just go with the first one here. We'll just throw an exception. If somehow a null got in there, maybe we should know about it. Maybe somebody's trying to spoof the system. Let's not cover up an error. And that's all of them. So now we can come in. We don't have any errors or warnings anymore. So now we can come in and enable the top level nullable context. Save that. No new warnings pop up. Then we can come through each of these files here. Again, on a large project, this would probably be a nightmare. Go ahead and wipe all of these enables out. And now we have a clean shared project. All right. And we can rebuild that, and we shouldn't have any errors or warnings. That's a clean build. And we can drop back to GitHub, our Git history, and we have everything in shared here. I want to stage, so I can temporarily ignore that stuff. Again, these are database files that were generated, and there's no git ignore, which there should be. It's a pain point of this whole solution. We'll say shared lib updated with nullable context. There is an issue number that this fixes as well. I think I have it written down on my other screen. Fixes issue 105. There are going to be more steps in fixing 105. Maybe say partially. I don't think that... sometimes GitHub will automatically try to close issues. I don't think that'll hit it, though. Maybe... Do I need the hash in there? Is that what it is? They actually have a hash button in this. Link your items. Oh, okay. I didn't use the word closes. So it should... As long as I don't use the word... If I say fixes and closes issue or closes issue, it will automatically try to close it. I don't have the authority to do that anyway, so it's not going to matter. But we'll just say it fixes the issue, and then we'll add a couple more commits that are going to, quote, fix the issue as well. And this I'm confident I can commit. And now I've got a local commit on that one. I'm not going to push that branch yet because I got a lot more work to do. This is only on these the zero solution, and there are 10 solutions in this thing. We need to close all these tabs out, get that out of the way, and move on to the next part, which is the server part of the project. So in the server part of the project here, we're going to do the same thing. We'll start with this ODIC controller, jump up to the top of it, say nullable enable, and pray to the nullable gods that there aren't a bunch of warnings. So that one's clear. We don't even need that there. I'm going to take this out. There were no warnings in it, and when I enable it on the solution level, if there's anything I missed, it'll come up. So we'll enable it here. We got a couple dereference of possible nulls that showed up. This is one that I was talking about earlier that needs to be addressed with some kind of exception. My opinion here is I would actually not call this get user either. If there's a possibility that this could be null, I would call it try get user ID. So there's a kind of context that there could be an exception thrown here. But we are going to, let's see, I think we should probably move this to a variable. What does this thing even return? It's a string, of course, but it's a nullable string. So find first value is a nullable string. So you can see in the method signature, it can return null. And it says that returns the value for the first claim of the specified type, otherwise null if the claim is not present. If the claim is not present, we don't want to return 0 here and let the process continue. This is an issue. Like the user was logged in, somehow their credentials their claim is no longer valid. So we really need to say string question mark result equals, and then in here we'll say if result equals null. It auto completed that. Should say is null. If you know a claim will always exist and will never be null, you can just add the bang there, or you could add the check. So I'm not going to pretend. I mean, if it is null and I throw the bang in there, you're going to get a null exception, a null reference exception. And that would suffice too. This is going to give me a little more context around what the error, how the error came about. So I'm just going to go ahead and force the error, I think, on this one. I don't expect this to be a common thing, but if it does happen and the result is null, we want to throw a new, and we could do a authentication or access. Is it access except? No, that's field access. I think there's an authentication one in here. Unauthorized access exception. We could try that one. Used on an authorized access exception. We can say user claim was not found. So we'll throw an exception, return the result. Okay. Does that sound okay? Let me know your thoughts on that one. Because this is dealing with authorization. It's a security claim, so it's not just a null reference exception. We were trying to access something we didn't have authorization to access. So we'll get the user ID, throw an exception, or just return the ID that was found. So the process can't move forward. Alrighty, let's see what do we have next. We've got this one is another security related feature. So this again, we're trying to enforce the existence of a pizza special and topping in the database. So this nullable thing can come through. It's another one where I don't think this is possible. Yeah, that's interesting, Smab. So Smab's talking about the previous thing again. The null, let's see, where was it? I thought it was on this page. Where we're trying to get the user, I must have closed it, get username. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so I don't think you can have an empty name. I guess it could be somehow possible. Well, it's using the name identifier. Name identifier can't be white space, I don't believe. This is, for example, every system is going to be slightly different. That's why it's called name identifier, but I think it can be an email address, an ID number. There's a couple different things. You could look at the schema, it might tell you. Love how there's no way to click on it. See if the schema tells us anything. I did get it to come up. It just came up off screen. The resource has been removed, it says, for that schema. Love it. Gotta love it. Good old security. We're looking for the schema for the security policy, and it's so old it's been removed. Yeah, I don't think a blank name is possible. We'll just throw an exception if it's null, because null means it's not, there's no name identifier found. And the name identifier is usually an ID. It's an ID of some kind. It says the URI for a claim that specifies the name of an entity. So it's actually a URI, so it would not be null or not be empty. If it's a URI, then it's going to be a resource identifier. So we're looking up a URI and pulling back another object. So it's finding the first value. Okay, so the find first value is the part. So it returns the value of the claim specified. Otherwise, the claim is not valid. And the value is a string. And then it must take that string and, let's see, user. So it's off the user. I don't know. My brain broke. Yeah, I have to look that one up again. I need to see what the claims looks like. And we could always set a breakpoint later, authorize ourselves into it, and look what that claim looks like. But yeah, it's some sort of string. I think it's the email address, though. I swear I know that for some reason. It's an email address in the context of this app. I know depends on what the authentication product is, that it may be something different. Could be a username, it could be an email, it could be an ID number. It's very generic, but it's never an empty string. This one is pizza special may be null here. We could throw a null reference exception again. We could do, is this on the wrong spot here? Why can't we use that one? Because it's an int. It's an int and that will return a null. So this is an int. This is a nullable int. So what we could do here is we could just get the default special ID, which would be 0. So we could do this. No, we can't. We can't do that? I thought I could do that. Oh, okay. I have to not forgive, but I have to do that first. So if special is not null, then it checks ID, and then ID returns a nullable int. Or actually, it'll short circuit. If specials is null, then it'll return 0. Otherwise, we'll return the ID. I don't believe special can get this far, null. If it did, we would simply just get special 0. Special 0 is kind of like the default pizza. Like, that's going to be the first special in the thing. It's a sample app. I mean, you could either throw a null reference exception here or just complete the order with the special of 0. It's not going to end the world. They're not going to exploit anything by ordering whatever occupies special 0. Unless special 0 didn't exist. But then we're setting the special to null, so that it would still be nothing if they created it. They were able to create special 0 if it wasn't there. But yeah, I think that's safe enough. We can go with that. And I'm sorry if my camera keeps shaking. I totally forgot to turn off. Oops, not double equals. So this, I think, suffices, unless somebody has a better idea. So we're just basically, I think this is going to get like a cheese pizza. If you tried to force it into having a special that didn't exist. You're just going to end up with a cheese pizza. There's not a lot of like try-catch handling in this application to begin with, so I don't like throwing too many exceptions all over the place for them to just show more holes in the security of the application. So I think that makes me happy. I'll keep that one for now. Don't like the idea of putting invalid correct values. Yeah, I got you. But if we did throw an exception, we would see, let's see. The exception would be, we would end up getting what, a server 500 on the client side. Probably overthinking this, really. We'll just leave this for now. We'll see if, when I submit the pull request, see if, like Dan Roth, Steve Sanderson, somebody, they're not the ones that even wrote this. So the person that wrote it doesn't even work on that team anymore. I don't know who's going to review it, but maybe they'll come up with something to push back on. I'm going to keep that for now, but I know what you mean. Extension methods for the API. And I've got a hard out here soon. We got about 20 more minutes. Nullable enable on this one. What's weird is we have the same user ID context thing here. This should be a common method that's somewhere, but it's not. For some reason, they're all private methods. Oh, this one's static, so geez, okay. So these are the two methods that do the exact same thing. They could have been consolidated somewhere, but for some reason they're not. This one's a private static. The other one's, okay, they are slightly different. This one, okay. So one of them is taking HTTP context and it's public static. Where is it being used? Let's double check that one. One reference being used in this file because they're all extension methods. Pizza API extensions. This must have been something that was added later, and for some reason they didn't use this order controllers method, or so it's actually used in here. What if we moved it? Let's take this. We'll put that here and then fix it up so it takes this HTTP context. So context.user, delete that. And then let's deduplicate this code, go back to orders controller, delete this. And then it should light up with an error where it's being used, right? Right. Where's it at? Where's it even being used? There it is, user ID. Get user ID is now on Pizza API extensions, and then we'll pass in the HTTP context that is here. Did I do that wrong? HTTP context. Inaccessible. There we go. That should take care of it. And it did. So move that into one place so we don't have to mess with that twice. All right. So that one is fixed. All righty. This is the entity framework context. Now, from what I've read, hey, Sean with Code with Sean. How are you? It was nice seeing you. Back from DevUp. We had a good time out there in St. Louis. I'm doing well. We're doing some nullability stuff, following up on that conference content. We've got the Blazing Pizza app from Microsoft's tutorials, and we're upgrading it because it's out of date. It's a little old. If you're going to do that, you should move it out of the class because it's confusing. It's in Pizza API extensions, and it's got an API endpoint, which looks like it was bolted on. It's already somewhat confusing. I think they added a chapter on, what's it called? They added a chapter on push notifications. And when they did that, they just bolted on an API instead of using the already controller methodology. They went ahead and did the minimal API methodology and did an app.mapput. And then that's all that's in here besides the get user ID thing. But it's still, let's see, this one's under notification subscribe. Is that the only? There's specials and toppings. It's already confusing. I'm just gonna leave it. It's why it's in here with the stuff. I mean, it belongs to all controllers, really, or it should. But some controllers are split between an orders controller and this controller that's using minimal API. So we've got like old school, we've got the new school. It's kind of a catch-all file as it is. We'll just leave it as a catch-all file. Let's enable this one. DB sets. So my research shows, let me know if you encountered this. DB set, they added, I believe, something to the compiler that says if this is a DB set to not throw the null warning that says that it needs to be set before exiting the constructor. I think that's relatively new because I think you used to have to use the null forgiving operator on these. Am I right or wrong? Like, is this like an Entity Framework Core update versus like Entity Framework 6? Or is it the Roslyn compiler was given some knowledge that these are not nullable issues? These used to throw false negatives all the time, and you had to use the default bang here. Right? Pretty sure that's a thing. We don't have to now, though. They do not trigger warnings anymore. So you literally just said the same thing I did, Smab. I think this is right, just don't quote me on it. That's what you guys are supposed to do, is verify for me. Say, yeah, that's a thing. You're not crazy, old man. All right. Just validate my insanity is all you did. So I'm not throwing anything in here. So nullable enable here looks like it's good to go. I'm going to take it out. This literally has nothing in it, so we don't have to enable it there. Ooh, this could be a problem. Program CS. Nullable enable. On that one, let's see what we get. Nothing, really? Oh, that's nice. Usually see all kinds of weird stuff in here, especially if you're using configuration, because configuration manager returns nullable values, which is annoying, but it happens. Seed data should not have anything, right? Nullable enable on seed data, see nothing coming back. So that means we are likely done. If we do have something that's on a file that I didn't expect there to be any issues in, we'll say nullable enable on the whole project. We'll go back through each one of these that we touched and remove the nullable enable from it. And if there are any leftover null issues, they should be surfaced when I save this all out and recompile. Oh, you found it. Did you really find it? This is awesome. Microsoft Learn, EF Core. I can't open the link on my end. That's the only thing I don't like about StreamYard. Let me see if I can do it here. Cool. Nah. Twitch. Twitch.tv. Yada, yada, yada. And now I can click on it. I had to pull up Twitch chat. This is on the relationships, older versions. Link operators. DB contexts. Collection navigations, like I think I talked about this a little bit. This is a good note here. Collection navigations which contain references to multiple related entities should always be non-nullable. An empty collection means that there's no related entities, but the list itself should never be null. Interesting. Although this generally causes compiler warnings, EF7 core and above suppress this warning. Ah, thank you. Since EF automatically initializes these via reflection. Nice. An older version of EF core, you can work around this problem as follows. DB set customer. So it's making it use a null forgiving operator. I honestly, what is this doing? So we're saying customers, we're giving it a read-only property. Where does set customer come from? That's the part I'm confused at. What is set customer? Educate me, chat room. What does that mean? Is that, where does set come from? Is it a DB context thing? Is that a keyword? Set customer. Is this part of DB set? What is that? Makes me want to go into the context and type it in, just see what comes up. So they're saying you could do that, and then the result is set customer. Or, well, in our case, it'd be order. That set order. Gotcha. This was part of DB set. Set. DB context.set creates a DB entity that can be used to query and save. So it's a method off of DB context that creates a DB set of whatever. I would have never thought to use that. So that would sound like an infinite loop to me or something. Okay. Well, apparently that works too. So that's a thing. Today I learned another thing. That's why they have it documented. All right, Smab. You're trying to pull some strings with me today. Of course, it's why they documented it, because nobody knows about it. Obviously. I love that show, like the Ancient Aliens, where like every time something is completely not obvious, the guy's like, obviously it's aliens. You know, obviously. But obviously that's why they documented it, because nobody knows about it. Love that response. We still have one possibility of null. This one comes and goes, apparently. When I clicked on it, it disappeared, but it is in here. I don't know why it's half here and half not here. It's a quantum error. It's both here and not here. We'll try to rebuild one more time. I know where it's at. There it goes. I finally underlined it after a full rebuild. But login partial. This is another one of those claims things. It's in the UI. I'm assuming that we are good if we've gotten this far. So it already uses sign-in manager, and if they're signed in, it's going to display this. If there's some, like, again, we'll use the quantum realm. Some user is both here and not here, and somehow gets logged in. I'm still just going to do the simple thing here and just say, go ahead and conditional this. And if the identity is not there, we'll just not show it. But I don't think this is ever going to actually hit. And then let's try to rebuild and see if that... I remember fixing that in their templates when nullable checks came out first. Is this in the UI thing here, or is that on the null or the EF conversation? Still showing up. Why is that still showing up? That should be valid. I don't know why the compiler's throwing issues there. And that's in scaffolded code too, by the way. That's stuff that was written ages ago. But yeah, that should satisfy that null warning. Let's try a clean and rebuild again. It's got to be a cached resource issue. Succeeded, fails, no warnings. So we're just going to kind of do the null propagate or null conditional operator here, and it just won't render a link for the username if we do that. But like I said, this if here, if sign-in manager is signed in, this should not be null at that point. So I feel confident that that's okay to do. And that is all of the server. So I can go back into here, changes. Please tell me I didn't commit the database. Okay, there's the database. So I don't want to stage that. I want to stage this, this, that, and that. And then I'm going to do amend commit. And no, I don't want to do amend commit, but we can at least copy the message. And I want to say that the server was updated with nullable context, partially fixes issue 105, commit the staged. Those are done, and what perfect timing. I have to leave for a meeting here. And I've got let's see, what else do we have left on this? We'll pick this up next week and we'll just keep running with it. We're gonna have to do some work instruction updates on this too. Well, we want to try to get this done fast though, because .NET 8 is coming like really quick, and I know this is going to get updated to .NET 8 as well. I don't think there's anything in the client. Let's double check these real quick. Let's see what happens if we set nullable across the board on this one. So there's not much in these. And then we'll do nullable enable here as well, and then build it and see what warnings we get. Fails, no fails, 2 warnings. There's only 2 in all of this. We can go ahead and fix these up. This is on the map portion, and this is pre-built for us, and I believe what we need to do here, we are on the map. Why don't I see the map? When I say the map, how many of you have children or are now singing the Dora the Explorer theme song? How many? Come on. Admit it. You're doing it. This one, again, we can't use required here. I like to use this. The .NET team is saying don't use it because they're going to add source generators, which then cause compile time errors when that feature gets added. It hasn't been added yet, so it will be a breaking change, I suppose. The other option is to say default, bang. If we're going to do that, I'm going to recommend we also say editor required for that one. So we're going to require that the list of markers is supplied. Otherwise, the map just doesn't work. So the map gets updated. Who else gets updated? The description. Descriptions, just my gut feeling for most things that have descriptions is they can be empty if they're not set. Usually descriptions aren't the end of the world if they're not there. Could do a new empty list as well. That's a good idea. Default would essentially be null, but yeah, a list of empty would be better, wouldn't it? Although we are going to still say it's required. So it's going to show a warning, and if that warning isn't satisfied, it'll at least default to something and try to not throw null. I have to see how is markers used. It's being passed to the JS runtime. Because the JS runtime is responsible. I don't know how it's going to respond to that, but probably better than it would a null, I suppose. So yeah, we'll do that. Good eye there, Smab, again. What else do we have? I believe that's it. Rebuild. I've noticed on Blazor, on the Razor side of things, The errors have a tendency to vanish from time to time when there's still errors in the project. But we resolved a couple there, and it looks like they're good. I'm going to close all but this and say that we got it. We've completed 0, 0. And then the next thing we need to do is, I don't think any of those were in. I think the 0, 0, I think is just like run it, and it should just build. Like 0, 1 is when you actually start writing code. So there's no real work instructions to update in this project. We'll move on to the next one. That's where things get tricky. So this one is going to be Razor projects were updated. We want to stage that and not the database. It won't let me do it like that. Probably be easier to... Oh, everything got staged. Yeah, that. On stage that. Commit that change. Good to go. I've yet to run it. Well, you don't have any faith in the code we just wrote that it's not going to run. I believe it will run just fine. I did have issues like on the last time I tried this, like with submitting orders when the nullable context wasn't enabled completely across all the projects. So we won't have that issue again, but it looks like we are good to go here. What was one of the APIs that we can hit? What's one of the open public ones? I really hate that there's two solution explorers. One when you're debugging, one when you're not. Server. Yeah, that's something we can check real quick. But what I've learned from this is the nullability stuff doesn't really affect the database. At least a couple samples I've run. I thought it would. So what we can do, we'll stop this. And we can check that really fast, actually, by... Like, it would warn me that a migration needs to take place when it goes to create the database if something wasn't right. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe Entity Framework would come back and say that the migration strategy is out of date or some annoying thing like that if you change an entity and don't update the database. At least it used to do something like that. So you can see the database got repopulated. And then if we go to the controller, we've got get orders, which we don't have any orders. Get order with status. Is it in the API extensions? Specials. Just specials and toppings. So we should be able to go to here and say specials. And there's our specials. And you can see there's no null anything in there to worry about. Toppings are here. So it pre-populated the things in the database it needed to populate. So our database is okay. Our database is good. And we no longer have changes to commit. These are database related. So we can ignore those. I can even delete them. It'll rebuild them when the app gets regenerated, but we're on a clean commit here. And we'll pick up on the next solution next time. So what I have to do on the next one, not sure if I want to do these on air or not. I don't know how entertaining it will be. But if I look in my Solution Explorer here, dart back out to this, there is all of these solutions, what I need to do is copy what we did in here, literal copy file, copy paste into here, the next one down, and then we need to open it up, and then in client there's going to be pages that got built, and this is going to be all Razor related stuff, and we'll have to update the work instructions, and we may actually have to just build the workshop out to do it, because it just makes more sense to do it that way. It's going to be under aka.ms Blazor workshop. And then we would look at, like, for example, session 1. I think there's immediately in here a couple null issues. One of them being we're going to fetch a list of specials from the server. You see, we newed up a list. This is null right here, even though it's not being explicitly set null. It is null. So in the first step, there's a null issue. And then HTTP client. Maybe somebody can answer this one. So do me a favor. HTTP client, like, try to make me understand. If I call HTTP client get from JSON async, it will return a nullable list of whatever, or it will return a nullable of T. When is HTTP get from JSON async ever returning a null and not throwing an error? When does get from JSON async ever return null but not throw an error? I had to think on that one. Like, I don't know of a reason that it should do that. If there is an empty set of something, yeah, Sean, I thought about that. You doubt it does too, but like it returns nullable. It's part of the method. I think get from JSON async is an overload anyway. And let's see, get from JSON async is being used everywhere. Is it not part of this repo? It's not part of ASP.NET? What is that library part of? Anybody know where the source code is on that one? If things don't match properly, it can return null. I think that's not true. If you call a method, and I mean, we can look, I've got a Blazing Pizza thing up over here. If you look at a controller, and I'm running out of time very quickly here. I do have to be out in the next minute. If we look at a controller, because that's essentially what it's calling. If I call a get from whatever, this is the proper response. If it's null, return not found. Not found is a 404 status code. Get from JSON async, if it gets a 404 status code, it should then throw an exception, does it not? Or does it swallow the error and make it null? That's where I'm confused. So maybe what I need to do, see, can I look at it this way? It's funny, nobody knows. Like, we just call it. We don't know what it actually does. And I'm guilty of this. I'm not blaming anybody else. I've used this for so long and never actually sat down and thought about what the heck is get from JSON async actually doing with the, why would it return null? So we can view source code this way. So if the client is null, it throws an exception. It does a HTTP response message, get async. Once it's done with that, it passes it off to get from JSON async core. Get from JSON async core, wraps it in a using, says response wait, ensure status code. It will throw an exception. It will throw an exception. It returns null if it's not valid. If it's not valid JSON, it'll throw a JSON exception if it's not valid JSON. Yeah, it'll throw a JSON parsing error if it's not valid JSON, not null. It's not typically a thing that's done. You can return null from an API. It's typically not the thing, though. It's rare that you see a null value as the response. It's either a 400 status code, an empty whatever, empty foo, an empty t. But when is it ever null? And this shows you too. So if I return, like my controller in my app says, my orders controller returns not found, then the get from JSON async blows up. So like this exception that I have here, deserialized returns null when? Oh, returns a nullable. Okay, so if it's the deserialize process that returns null, so system.text.json deserialize returns nullable, that's what's forcing the this to be nullable, the get from JSON async to be nullable. Content is not null. So this just verified something here for me. If the response ensure status code response, they're using that to trap any nulls, because now they're saying response content null forgiving operator. They're like, well, this status code is good. Content has to be there. It has to be not null. Then we'll do read from JSON async of t. If that is of t and not t nullable, why is it returning null? Like, where's that nullable coming from? My brain hurts. I don't know. All right, like, so we're saying return nullable of t here. Then we're verifying that it's not null. The read from JSON async, which would contain the deserialization method, is not returning null because it's of t. Read from JSON async of t. Returns the HTTP content and returns the value that resulted from deserializing content as JSON in the asynchronous operation. I guess it is nullable. It is nullable. Look at it right there. So even though it's specified as t, the return type is nullable of t. So let's see, can we dive into that one? Yeah, it is returning a nullable. So it's the read from JSON async because it does the deserialization that returns the null. And I can't find source on read from JSON async. There it goes. Read from JSON async. If content is not null, throw null exception. Read from JSON async core. Boy, this is a rabbit hole. Using, all right, there we go. Content stream, get content stream, await, serialize, async helper. Deserialize. Read from stream, async is nullable. This thing's nullable up the whole chain. So something deep down can return null. I guess you can potentially, even though it's uncommon, you can deserialize null, a null object. Because serialization isn't just for HTTP, it's for all sorts of things. So if you're deserializing text, that text could have null. It could be a null object. So just basic deserialization defines that it's nullable. So I guess that goes deep down into the serialization process. So you're right, Mr. Magoo. You nailed it the first time. It makes more sense when you think about it in an isolated, deserialization in an isolated manner instead of like in the context of HTTP traffic. Because it's not like it's deserialize any string. It's not just an HTTP string. So it could be null. And because it's null, everything around it is nullable. So it's very uncommon that that is going to happen in the context of HTTP client. So I've been seeing this a lot. So you could either throw an exception, which one has probably already happened by the time you get here, or you can create a new of whatever. That works as well. Mr. Magoo, that's enough to close the show. That's a good mic drop moment there. I'll give you that one. We're going to go out on Mr. Magoo's comment. It's been fine for the last 35 years without all this. Just, it's been fine. Thank you all. Thindle, thank you very much. Everybody had some input today. Appreciate it. And we'll see you soon.